The name of this course is How Social Media and Digital Technology is Changing Our Lives. My name is Stu Miller. I'm an Osher member and a former Chief Information Officer for several large corporations. My friends refer to me as a nerd. I prefer to think of myself as a geek. Nerds talk about technology, geeks do it. So in this course, we're going to do a lot of things about social media and social networking. The first thing we're going to do is describe the difference between the two. It gets blurry sometimes, but there is a difference. Then we'll talk about the history of social media, and you might be surprised to hear it goes back to the late 70s. And then we had such things as AOL's Instant Messenger in the 90s, and then we had MySpace in the early 2000s. We'll talk about the more popular social sites and who uses them, sites like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. We'll also talk about some of the lesser known sites, lesser known to you perhaps. For example, LinkedIn, Spotify, Pinterest, and of course we'll discuss YouTube as well. And Foursquare. What is Foursquare? It tells your friends where you are. How has social media impacted global events? Events such as Arab Spring, the London Olympics, the Michael Jackson death, and the upcoming presidential elections. What are some of the negatives that are associated with social media? And by that I mean things, everything from email to cell phone hacking to texting, and what's the good, the bad, and the ugly of all those things. How are smartphones and tablets changing our traditional concept of computing? And what does future hardware look like? We'll also talk about the concept of big data, which is where they're gathering more information about you than you can imagine, such as where you shop, what movies you go to, where do you go on vacation. And these things will impact marketing in such a way that they will affect your purchasing in the future. They will even impact what television stations are brought to you rather than you looking for them. We will log on to a lot of these internet sites so you can see what this buzz is all about. And you can try and figure out what the average kid is spending 7 to 9 hours in front of a screen doing all day long. So I hope you join us, and as we try to demystify the world of social media and digital technology and see how it will impact your lives in the future. Thanks so much.
In Teaching with Stu, we're going to look at social media, but we're also going to look at the history of journalism and that intersection, really, of modern journalism and social media. So much has changed about our news media in the last 10, 20 years. But we're really, I think, on the cusp of another revolution in terms of how we interact as readers and viewers and listeners and users with media. And I think that's going to shift from the more formal website, thing that we've gotten somewhat familiar with the last 10 years, to this interactivity on social media, where we're going to bring in our own reporting, our own kinds of news and information that we want to put out in front of the public. And the challenge will be for existing news organizations to deal with it, for new news organizations to go up to handle it. And really, as individuals, we're all going to become editors and publishers. So we're going to look at that intersection of social media and traditional journalism and where it's headed, the journalism of the future. And so with Stu, I hope we give you a good primer on how to both use the media as a consumer and perhaps as a participant as well.
In the 16th century, a young Catholic priest nailed 95 theses to the door of a church in Wittenberg, Germany. In doing so, he shook the foundations of the religious establishment. He replaced the sale of indulgences with a theme, Sola Scriptura, Scripture alone, and salvation by faith alone. And as an added bonus, he simply urged the Christians to pray his beloved Psalms. 3 centuries later, one of those Psalms, the 23rd, brought comfort to soldiers facing death from both north and south who were fighting the most uncivil war imaginable. In the next century, a young Catholic priest who had taught seminarians the Psalms and how to pray them fervently sat in a prison cell awaiting his own execution. And while doing so, he recited the Psalms, and he was to die for having tried to assassinate Adolf Hitler. From the very beginning, the Psalms have been very popular. In the first century, the sectarian Jews in the community that produced the Dead Sea Scrolls loved the book of Psalms above all others. There are more copies of that book that have been discovered than of any other book in the Bible. The early Christians quoted the Psalms more than any other book in the Bible. Why such popularity? I think the secret is not that these are words of God. They don't pretend to be words of God. They are very human words. They express the deep desires of individuals and their fears. They are the zest of life, as I like to say. They are spice. And I shall use this anagram to explain the Psalms. S is for security, safety, the desire to be free from danger, from war, from debilitating disease, and from the terrorists who would use either bombs or military weapons and fire into the crowds of innocent people. They are the deepest desires and longings. P is for peace, peace of mind, and the happiness, the Osher, happy are those, blessed are those who follow the way of righteousness. I is for intelligence. They are the common sense to choose the good and to shun that which would destroy. And C is for collegiality, for companionship, the knowledge or the assurance that you will never be alone, even when facing death, that you will have friends and you will have family, and most of all, God by your side. E is for exoneration, exculpation. E is for the awareness that you can be forgiven for all the mistakes you have made, forgiven and the slate washed clean. So the Psalms are the spice of life. This class will begin with the oldest of the Psalms, and these are from ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Psalms are basically hymns and laments. The oldest hymn is the Egyptian hymn to the Aten, or the sun god, and it is the model for Psalm 104. From Mesopotamia, the oldest lament is that over the fall of the city of Ur, with which Abraham in the Bible is associated. We shall begin with individual psalms expressing the cry of sorrow and agony and the hymns of praise and jubilation. In doing so, I think you will see that the Psalms will add zest to your existence.
Hi, my name is Beth Gottlieb. I'm going to be teaching The Rhythm of Music and Life. Here's our textbook. It's called Planet Drum. Now, this is not a typical music course. I want you to think about your life. What's important in your life? Everybody always says, when I die, on my gravestone, I don't want to put that I worked for the ABC company and spent 8,000 hours a week working. I want on my gravestone that I was a good parent, family member, great friend. What's important in life are relationships with people. And this course is about that. This course is about people and interaction with people. So what does that have to do with music? Rhythm is everything that we do. Every day, I want you to think about your life. You get up, you step out of the bed, you walk in rhythm, you brush your teeth in rhythm. Your mate, your soulmate, your friend, you walk in rhythm. You have that connection with people. Spiders weave webs in rhythm. What does that have to do with all this stuff? Well, societies are shaped by beliefs, and a lot of those beliefs have to do with music, which is part of communication. This right here is called a talking drum. This is one of Africa's oldest instruments. It's a skin stretched over a cylindrical tube, and when you press it, it talks. And in Africa, this has been around for eons. And people actually have languages that use this. We'll study African cultures and how they use this, but not just for fun, but for everyday lives. Native Americans, this is actually squirrel skin. Sorry, squirrels. But this is a healing instrument. And I want you to think back to when you were a child and your mother said, if I touch you, you feel better. Well, music and rhythm does heal. This right here is from Brazil. These are nuts. And not only do they use it for having fun, but it's also part of ceremonies. This right here, women wear around their waist for ceremonials, for weddings, birth. This thing, you probably wonder what it is. It's a kashishi. Okay? It's from Africa. It even says made in Cameroon. But this is the mama of the tribe. Now we even have different cultures, like the Asian cultures. This is a prayer bowl that Buddhists use to pray with. And there's all kinds of stories. Also, communication and rhythm, especially ancient times, used instruments to hunt with. So they would make instruments in order to catch prey just to eat. They'd also make instruments to make sound effects. This one. This sounds like thunder. And I want you to think about rhythm. The ancients, I remember last week, we just moved to Nashville, and they had a horrific lightning storm. It sounded like World War III. I can't imagine the ancients, what they thought about back then. So they would make instruments to imitate nature and talk about them. So one of the last things I'm going to show you is this. This is neat. What is this stick? This is a rain stick. Now the Aztec Indians use this to pray to the rain gods. What's really neat about this is from Mexico. You see all the holes in it. And it has all kinds of caverns carved, so it sounds like rain. So yes, this class will have some fun. You'll get to be a percussionist, you'll get to play an instrument, but more importantly, we're going to discuss people and relationships and what makes a great life and how did cultures come to believe in what they do. I hope you can join me this fall.
Hi, I'm Keith Metter. I am a professor of psychiatry and preventive medicine at Vanderbilt University. I also have an appointment as professor in the Graduate Department of Religion and serve as the director for the Center of Biomedical Ethics and Society here at Vanderbilt. I am delighted to have the opportunity to be working with you for the class this fall titled Religion and Health, Pitfalls and Possibilities. I have worked with the intersections of religion and health spirituality and health, theology and health, whatever language you prefer, for the last 20 years really of my professional career, and consider it a real opportunity to be able to have the conversations with you this fall of truly examining the possibilities that have evolved over the last 2 decades of research and intellectual inquiry into these intersections, but first to examine the pitfalls. I do think that there has been significant lapses of intellectual credibility as well as commitments to scholarship during these couple of decades of work on religion and health that we've seen during the last 20 years. But I also think that there are some things that we've learned about these intersections that actually could contribute to our ongoing efforts to reconceptualize how can we best care for one another in a culture and a society that really struggles with all sorts of limitations while also having, while the needs are phenomenally increasing all around us. I look forward to those possibilities with you, and thank you for the opportunity to have a conversation.
I very much hope that you will join me in an exploration of New York City during the late 19th century, the so-called Gilded Age, and the early 20th century known as the Progressive Era. Our focus then will be on the 1870s to the 1910s, but we'll touch on related important developments earlier and later. New York City has been important in my life and academic careers. My immigrant parents entered the United States by way of Ellis Island. They took initial American jobs there, and they met on the Ellis Island ferry. Marrying, they lived in New York City for half a century. I lived with my parents in Manhattan and then Brooklyn through college years before exploring America in graduate school, Connecticut and Iowa, the United States Army, Georgia and Alabama, and academia, first in California, later in New York City, and for 40 years at Vanderbilt and in Nashville. Wherever I have taught, I have focused on research and writing on New York City and that area of the Northeast, especially during the late 19th century. New York City had become the nation's most populous by 1810, the hemisphere's most populous by 1860. This when it comprised only Manhattan, and after 1874, a sliver of the Bronx. In 1898, Greater New York City, the city as we know it, came into existence. Manhattan, Brooklyn, the nation's third most populous city at the time of its absorption, Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island. New York City was now the world's second most populous city, behind only London. We'll note factors that contributed to the remarkable growth of New York City, some of them natural, others involving human action, whether private or governmental. Like a magnet, New York City attracted immigrants and migrators. We'll look at 4 major immigrant groups. First, the Irish and Germans, later East European Jews and Italians. And 2 smaller groups that migrated to New York City largely from other parts of the United States. African Americans from the South, Chinese largely from the West. We'll consider the group's backgrounds and how these affected their lives in New York City. We'll also deal with ethnic, religious, and racial conflicts that flared in the metropolis. New York City's economy during the 1870s, 1910s differed in important respects from that of cities that relied on heavy industry, most significantly iron and steel production. New York's economy was characterized by a spread of consumer-based industries, garments most famously. We'll also examine the economic basis of Lower Manhattan, the Wall Street area, where office buildings, not factories, rose to new heights during the late 19th century. Now, New Yorkers overwhelmingly lived in the city in which they worked. And so we'll comment on the housing in which they lived and the neighborhoods containing these structures, whether upper class and middle class single family dwellings, French flats or apartments as they came to be called, or tenement houses for the working class and the poor. The expansion of New York City and the growth of its population placed major and increasing demands on public transportation. We'll comment on street surface transportation, elevated trains, L's in New York City slang, and on subways. Ferry boats had long crossed the city's rivers. Now bridges did likewise over the East and Harlem rivers, though not until later, 1931, was the Hudson River bridged. Finally, we will note major disasters, whether natural, the blizzard of 1888, or accidental, 3 major fires, and of the toll of all too frequent tenement house fires, one of which killed my wife's great-grandfather and his young son. Dangerous communicable diseases that necessitated governmental and private responses during the period, cholera, tuberculosis, polio, will also be discussed. Fellow explorers of New York City, I will welcome your questions and comments during and after my presentations, and will provide you with some leads on which you can operate. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chris LeBogan. I'm a professor at the law school here at Vanderbilt. Been there for 4 years. I used to be at the University of Florida Law School. In both places, I taught criminal law and criminal procedure. Criminal law is the law of crimes. In other words, we talk about homicide, rape, murder, theft, and we also talk about the death penalty, and we talk about the purposes of punishment. Criminal procedure is actually 2 different courses, one having to do with regulation of the police, search and seizure rules, interrogation, and then the second part of criminal procedure has to do with the trial process, what happens after a person is arrested by the police and goes through trial and adjudication. And it also deals with sentencing to some extent. So what I'm going to be talking about in this Osher course, and what I'd like to cover with anyone who participates, are some of the hot topics in criminal justice. And we have 6 classes, so I want to talk about 6 hot topics. The first one probably will be the death penalty. Very, very hot topic. About 35 states in this country have the death penalty. It's very controversial, with the country basically split in half as to whether or not the death penalty is permissible or not. The second topic, the second week, would probably be the insanity defense. Another very hot topic. Some people think that if a person does a crime, they should do the time regardless of whether they're mentally ill or not. Cases like the Andrea Yates case, who drowned her 5 children, the Jared Loughner case, who just settled his case with the guilty plea, all raised issues having to do with mental illness and criminal law, and that's what we talk about in that second session. The third session would have to do with preventive detention and sentencing. Preventive detention is very controversial because what it involves is confining a person not for what they've already done, which is what criminal punishment is all about, but rather what they will do in the future. And more states are passing laws that allow preventive detention, so it's definitely worth talking about. The fourth topic would be government surveillance. Since 9/11 in particular, the government has poured an amazing amount of resources into various kinds of technology that can allow both visual and digital surveillance. By visual surveillance, I mean, for instance, drone cameras, cameras on satellites, CCTV, but there's also digital surveillance. That is the use of computers to access people's records, and sometimes it's called data mining. There is some constitutional regulation of these practices, but not very much. So once again, a very hot topic. The fifth topic might be interrogation practices. That is, what can the police do during interrogation? Obviously, they cannot torture people, at least that's been the traditional rule. We've seen actually some exceptions to that since 9/11. But separate and apart from the torture issue, there's also when Miranda warnings have to be given, whether police can lie to people they're interrogating, and so on. And then the sixth week, right now, I have that labeled the class decides. There may be some criminal law issues or criminal procedure issues that the class would want to talk about that maybe are suggested during the first 5 weeks, so we could leave it open. The other possibility, though, is talking about juvenile justice. We have a whole entirely separate system of justice for juveniles, and I think that's worth talking about at length, too, if that's what the class wants to do. So that's the course in a nutshell, and I hope you'll come.
Hi, I'm Karen Dyer. I'm a clinical exercise physiologist at the Dayani Center, and I would like to invite you to our wellness seminars that we're offering. There's going to be a mix of both expertise and also activity. It does not matter where you are in your activity level now, we will take you at that level. We're going to offer some very special classes. Not only will they be including the water, but also land exercise. We're going to have sit and be fit classes that will be in the chair. We're going to have some standing exercises. If you can't do those, we can modify. We're going to be working on balance. We're going to be working on strength. We're going to be working on cardiovascular fitness as well as strength training. And with some of our classes, we will be focusing on arthritis prevention and also working with those who have arthritis. These will be accompanied by education sessions that will be 30 minutes along with the classes, and these will be taught by geriatric nurse practitioner or exercise physiologist or physical therapist. And we would like to invite you to come and hope to see you there.